Today's video might be about bad trans anatomy, but I have a little good trans egg dino joining me. This is Baby Pud. I think today is the last day you can get Baby Pud. He may already not be available. I'm sorry. But yes, Baby Pud. Hey Spuds, it's Jamie. Welcome back to the channel on a video, or your first video, or your second, or your third, or your many videos. I don't know. I can't remember my intro, and welcome either way. I'm very glad to have you here. Today, we are looking at that bad trans anatomy. Oh my god. This video, yes, I love making these videos. Do I love making these videos? I do like it when we can have a little giggle at transphobia, because it's just gone beyond that realm of nonsensical. Not that any of it makes sense anyway, but it's just so ludicrous. And often that's what we find on bad trans anatomy. It's just complete misunderstandings about trans people, trans bodies, the transitioning process, everything to do with trans people just gone all wrong, which is what transphobes do anyway. It's what they're good at. Obviously, transphobia is not nice in any form, whether it's laughable, whether it's really serious. It's all sad and shouldn't exist. So I do like to make these videos, one, to call it out and to say, hey, this is transphobic and this is why, but also to lighten it a little, because if we don't laugh, we cry, right? Don't forget your Adam's apple, ma'am. You can't change your DNA. Everyone has an Adam's apple. You need to go back to anatomy class. This is also confidently incorrect. I literally had a visible Adam's apple before I started transitioning. Like, yes, people with higher testosterone typically have a more visible Adam's apple because of things that happen to the vocal cords in this region due to testosterone, but everybody has this piece of cartilage. It just depends on genetics, hormones, various different factors as to how visible it is. Good shout. I do feel like Adam's apples are such a common thing that transphobes go for, and that people generally kind of comment on about trans people. It's either shock that trans men have visible Adam's apples. I think this is mine. Hello. And then also using the Adam's apple as like a gotcha moment for trans women, which is just really bizarre, because a lot of cis women have visible Adam's apples. And actually, in the whole like transvestigation field, they have called cis women trans because they have Adam's apples. And there is just this absolute obsession over Adam's apples. I feel like it's slightly less now than it used to be like 5-6 years ago, but it's still there. There's like this undercurrent of all the apple in the throat. Get ready for trans dinosaurs in the new Jurassic Park. Buddy, you're not gonna believe this. Is this like mocking the mocking of woke culture? Because all those dinosaurs in Jurassic Park was specifically created female so that they would not reproduce, and then they, you know, nature found a way. So yeah, there's gonna be some woke garbage. Get ready for trans and non-binary characters and dinosaurs. Laughy face. What's with trans and non-binary? I don't understand the use of the bunny quotes here. Were the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park technically not trans, like the ones who clearly transitioned and changed in some way in order to mean that the dinosaurs generally could reproduce? Obviously a slightly different concept to human trans people, but then we're not trying to say that humans are the same as dinosaurs. I don't know why people are so hung up on that, oh, this woke culture of trans people, how dare. And it's like, yeah, how dare we recognize this group in society? I don't know, like a little bit of representation, it's not a bad thing. Some people just get really, really butthurt over it. Trans people exist? Oh my god, this has just shattered my entire world. How dare you? Sex and gender are different though. Sex is your genetic, gender is your perceptive/expression. That's how I see things anyway. I am trans, though if you have research that proves me wrong, please send it. Sex is your genetic, like chromosomes. I personally like see sex as being like multifaceted. You can't just rely on like the genetic components of chromosomes. There's primary and secondary sex characteristics and all of this stuff. Genitalia, reproductive organs, you know, there's so many different layers to it. It's not like a black and white. Pud just fell. Okay, Pud can go. It's not just a black and white thing. There's a grayscale in there. And then gender, I personally don't think gender is linked to expression. I think gender identity is very different to gender expression, and the two can be completely opposite to one another, and they do not need to impact each other, and certainly the way you express does not change your identity, and your identity does not need to dictate your expression. But obviously the two things are very separate concepts. Sex and gender are absolutely different, and people can view it slightly nuanced within those categories if that's how they see things. The important bit of this is they are different. They are both real and they are different to each other. Sex and gender are the same thing. I really don't see how some people can't understand this. I really can't see how some people can't understand that they are different. There's literal evidence to show things develop at different times. Your brain is separate to your physical appearance. Your thoughts and everything are separate to physical things. Just because we can't see gender doesn't mean it doesn't exist as its own separate thing. When fetuses are growing and developing, the genitals in the brain develop at different stages, and it is very plausible, and it's a strong theory, that that's how trans people are created. Woohoo, it's our birth during pregnancy, because different hormonal levels at different stages, and if they're slightly wrong at one stage or another, can lead to the brain and the genitals developing in different directions. So just saying, there's evidence that they are separate, and there's evidence that that separate development as well of these two things leads to people being trans if something doesn't quite happen as it typically should. Anyway, if you have research that proves me wrong, please send it. This is always the thing. Whenever I watch transphobic videos, whenever I hear transphobic arguments and all of this stuff, I'm like, give me the research. Even when they talk about research, they either don't cite it so you can't find it, or if you can find it after some searching, it's been really, really misinterpreted. Just take rapid onset gender dysphoria, for example. Hugely flawed methodology in the first place, very odd interpretation of the results, and then the desistance rate, flawed methodology done a very, very long time ago, still used now as an argument for kids and younger people to not transition, when we know that those results from the 80s and 90s are not right. They very, very rarely are able to send any research, and when they can, it's either philosophical opinion pieces, or it's debunked research with methodological flaws, or they have grossly misinterpreted it. Yeah. The person who thinks that gender and sex are the same have said it is the same thing but with two different words for it. It's basic preschool level stuff. And there lies the problem. Somebody never advanced beyond preschool biology. Oh dear. I don't know who's heard about this, but basically in the UK, there's proposed guidance and updates on sex education and things that would also prohibit the teaching of trans issues and gender identity within schools. So don't teach pupils about gender ID, schools told. Guidance also rules out sex education before 13. The whole guidance is just bizarre. Schools must not teach children that they can change their gender identity and should avoid explicit conversations about sex until they reach the age of 13, the government is to say. Children are not being taught that they can change their gender. They're not being sat down and said,
Timmy, you can choose to be a girl if you want to. You can change that old gender of yours.
They're not being taught that. They're being taught that trans people exist and trans people don't change their genders. This is just mind-boggling, because a literal proposed guidance for schools for education is being based on false facts. It's being based on people not being educated on a topic. It's so, Ministers will warn schools today that gender identity is a highly contested area and that teaching children about it could have damaging implications. Not teaching children about it has already had damaging implications. The reason why we're seeing more young people realizing they're trans is because it's being spoken about, because they are having that language younger. I would have given anything to have been taught and to learn about trans people in school and to know younger. And I wasn't even that old when I found out. I was 16. I started transitioning when I was 17. That's reasonably young, but I would have loved to have been able to find out pre-puberty and to have not had top surgery, as in get access to puberty blockers. But even if I couldn't do that, I would have loved to have just known sooner and had more life to live as my true self. I feel like I lost some of those years by not understanding who I was and why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I think everybody deserves to have as long as possible in their life to live as their true self, and they are being denied of this. And also, if kids are not trans. You're not going to convince them into taking on that discrimination and that poor access to healthcare and the lack of rights and the surgeries and all. People are not being forced or convinced to be trans or that they are trans. There is nothing wrong with self-exploration. Like, all kids, all people go through different stages of exploration in their lives, but there's also nothing wrong with teaching cis kids that trans people exist. That's all that's happening, and it's been built up as this big scary thing and this issue when it isn't. It's just trans people exist. Get over it. Let kids learn about it. And the whole gender identity is a highly contested area. It's literally not something that should be contested. We're going to look back on that statement in 20 years and be like, what the were they thinking? Because swap that out and say ministers warn schools today that being gay is a highly contested area. Schools must not teach children that they can change their sexual orientation. If you swap that out, it sounds absolutely ludicrous. So the way that sounds, if you're transphobic but not homophobic, and you think it sounds ludicrous when in the context of sexual orientation, that's how ridiculous it sounds to me as a trans person, and that's how ridiculous this sounds to trans people and trans allies. Oh my god. Staff will be explicitly told to avoid proactively teaching children about gender identity. If asked, they should teach biological facts about sex. You do realise that the existence of trans people is a scientific fact. Biological, psychological, all of the facts. It is a fact that trans people exist. It is a fact that gender and sex are separate things. And this is where we're going to end up with more people like the person on the slide before, where they're like, it's basic preschool level stuff because they never get taught beyond that. I do not want to read any more of this. This is just like section 28 all over again, but specifically aimed towards trans people.
Let's not talk about it. Let's just create a generation of trans people who were shamed and silenced and couldn't figure themselves out and had nobody to talk to about it.
How wonderful. The only reason gender identity is a contested issue is because there are massive arseholey transphobes out there who by chance have a platform and have chosen to dedicate their platforms towards bigotry because they're clearly just horrible people. Because why else would you dedicate your life, your following, your platform, your fame, your money towards hating on a marginalized group within society? I can see no other reason. Sorry, but trans women are not women. It's an extension of patriarchy to continue to dominate women. Oh my god. That is the most whack opinion I've heard. Are you trying to insinuate every trans woman is part of a big plan to oppress women? Notice how the concept of womanhood is being hijacked by men under the guise of trans rights. So directly and indirectly, yes to your question. They are missing some really important facts about trans people and trans women specifically, and the vulnerability of trans women and the level of discrimination faced by trans women, both for being trans and for being women. Trans women don't have some kind of privilege. They're not an extension of the patriarchy. They get a lot of shit. This is like flat earth level conspiracy theory that trans women are just trying to hijack the concept of womanhood under the guise of trans rights. I feel angry towards, but I also feel really sorry for people who have been suckered in this bad by a lie. The transphobia, and TERF and this type of transphobia, that is the ideology, and that is like the cult-like behavior and mindset. It's culty, it's conspiracy theory, and it's an ideology, and it's wrong. Why is everybody trans all of a sudden? What changed in the past 3 to 5 years? Just wondering what has caused this mass influx of trans students. When it's like this, it's like,
But they're not really trans, are they?
look at the pattern of left-handedness. Being left-handed used to be really stigmatized, and it still is within certain cultures, and it was something that kids were trained not to be. And if they were left-handed, it was like, no, use your right hand, learn. It appeared there was a very low number of left-handed people, when in fact all the left-handed people, or a lot of them, had just been forced to not be left-handed. And then as soon as that stigma around left-handedness dissipated, we saw this massive increase in the number of people who are left-handed. But actually we didn't see a massive increase in the number of people who are left-handed. We saw all the left-handed people being able to just be left-handed. We are seeing the same thing right now with trans people. We've had so much oppression for so long, and it feels ridiculous to say because the pushback against trans people right now and the level of transphobia is absolutely atrocious, and it does feel like it's building and building and building, but it's gonna fall down. I described it as a house of cards balancing on a matchstick because there is no substance to it. It is gonna come tumbling down one day, but we are seeing it building, so it feels ridiculous to say like when there used to be a huge level of stigma. But I think the difference is when it used to be stigmatized and a taboo and not spoken about at all. It's in conversation so much, and yes, a lot of those conversations are negative, but trans awareness is still growing. Trans representation in media, in a positive way as well, is still growing. Mainstream like news media, not good, but like television and things like that, we are seeing an increase. Books, all of these things, we see more trans people. So therefore, all those people that didn't have the language for it, didn't know what being trans meant, didn't understand why they were feeling the way they're feeling, now do. So it's not everybody's trans all of a sudden. What's changed in the past 3 to 5 years is people are aware that being trans is a thing that exists, and they are understanding the language for how they feel. It's not making them trans, it's helping them realize who they are, just like with left-handedness. Oh, okay, it's a trans flag, and these are all the things that trans people ruin, apparently, because it's the trans people that are the problem. It's not the transphobic politicians and celebrities and powerful people pushing the transphobic narrative and making you all scared of trans people. No, they're not the problem. Predatory cis men, not the problem. The problem is the trans people. I don't understand. So what do trans people do? Ruins female sports. Honestly, transphobes are doing this more than trans people. Trans people don't ruin female sports because what transphobes are wanting is to push trans men like me. I mean, I'm not sporty, but like, you know, a trans man who was this far into transition as well, they would be like, no, because you have to compete in the category of your assigned birth sex. Not that they say it like that. And there has actually been instances of trans guys being forced to compete in the women's category of the sport that they do, and then winning and being shouted at for winning and being said that they're dominating women's sports, when that's literally what transphobes wanted, because they're the ones that don't want trans women in women's categories, and then they push trans men into that. So they're literally pushing men into women's sports and removing a group of women from those women's sports. It just make sense, because it doesn't. Ruins education. How? Ruins preschool, ruins software jobs, ruins movies, ruins video games, ruins modding scenes, ruins tabletop RPGs, ruins wargaming, ruins political debates. And who is it that is bringing trans people into these political debates? Ruins universities/humanities, ruins leftism. Thanks for that one. It's kind of difficult now, because it used to be like, if people were like left-wing in their politics, they would most likely be like LGBT plus supportive, and now for trans people it's a bit muddy. Like, people can say they're left-wing and then be really transphobic. Ruins creative writing, ruins comic books, ruins Silicon Valley, ruins social media, ruins medical industry, ruins psychology, ruins military, somehow even ruins homosexuals. How did they do it? All of those things that you think have been ruined by trans people, if you feel they've been ruined by the lies and the conspiracy theories coming from transphobes, because trans people have been present in all of these areas for a very long time in some form of another, whether it was more secretively in the past, whether it wasn't like the best representation in terms of like media and like movies and TV shows in the more recent past. Trans people have been present in society and living their lives forever and have been in these areas. So female sports, trans women have competed at Olympic level since 2004. Like, I'm sure trans people have had jobs in software for a very long time. Trans people have been present in movies for quite a while now, and the quality of the representation is growing, but there's been like attempts at positive representation for quite a long time. And trans people have gone to university, have played games, have written books, have been in comic books, have been on social media, have been in the medical. Like, what I don't understand is why now are they thinking that trans people have ruined these things, when trans people have been involved in part of using whatever, all of these things, as long as cis people have been, because trans people have been around for as long as people have been around. The reason why they think that trans people are ruining it now is because they are being told that by transphobes, and transphobes are making the lives of trans people difficult and acting as if it's a problem that trans people exist. Transphobia is just bizarre. I feel like this post is like the epitome of, why did trans people ruin everything? And then it's actually the transphobes putting the pole through the spokes of the wheel and then falling off their bike and then being like, this is trans people's fault. A biological male won a women's beauty pageant in Nevada. What a progressive message to send to young girls. No matter what you do, men will always be better than you at it, including being a woman. Except trans women are not men. And this is where transphobes just fail at the first hurdle of understanding the concept and just being respectful human beings. So a trans woman won a women's beauty pageant in Nevada. How beautiful is that, to show how many different ways there are to be a woman and to show the progressiveness that we can have nowadays? And how inspiring is that to all the young trans girls out there? I mean, if a beauty pageant is the type of thing they look up to, it doesn't need to be, obviously. Men, check out my new car. Women, check out my new purse. Hollywood stars, check out my new trans kid. I think as well, this is where transphobes get really confused between gender expression and gender identity, because what we're kind of learning as a society is quite a lot of people will express themselves quite fluidly between like feminine and masculine when they are allowed a supportive environment to do so and to explore that. It's not anything to do with their gender identity. Because a celebrity may have a son who wears dresses, that doesn't mean that celebrity has a trans kid. It means that that celebrity is allowing their child to explore their expression and to wear and be in a way that makes them comfortable. They could have a trans kid, but transphobes are just seeing,
oh, this celebrity has a child who is a bit like non-conforming for their assigned birth sex. They are trans. Must be trans.
No, you're just equating expression with identity. Do most of you guys think you can get pregnant on Ask Transgender? Because from what I heard, I don't think that doctors insert fertility eggs into a trans woman's vagina during the surgery, since it seems pretty impossible. Do transphobes just think trans people don't understand anything? I feel like it's so patronizing often the way transphobes speak to and about trans people. So a lot of trans men can get pregnant. It would rely on surgeries they might have had or not had. It might rely on hormones that they're on or not on. But often trans men would have the potential to get pregnant. Trans women currently do not, but there are discussions of like womb transplants that could make it possible. I don't think it's something that's happening now, but it's a very possible reality for the future. But this is just like so patronizing and arrogant. Like,
most of you guys think you can get pregnant. From what I've heard, and clearly I know nothing because this next sentence makes me sound really silly, I don't think doctors insert fertility eggs into a trans woman's vagina during the surgery.
The surgery just tells you everything you need to know. There's a way to phrase this question. It's because it's accusatory. That's what's pissing me off about it. It's this whole like,
you know that this doesn't happen, right?
Rather than a, hey, I don't fully understand this concept. What does it mean when it comes to like trans people and having kids? Like, can trans people have babies and how? If that's the question that you want to ask, and there's some trans people out there who are comfortable asking, then sure, put it on a forum where it's been opened up for this conversation, but don't put it as an accusation or as like a patronizing, like,
you do realize this, right? I know nothing, but I'm telling you what you should know.
What if you were born the opposite sex? What? Height conversion chart. What is this? No, this is just bad anatomy. This is not just specifically trans. Okay. Woman to man. If your height is not mentioned here, girls need to add 5 inches in their height and guys just to subtract 5 inches in their height. So if you're 5 foot, you'd have been 5'5". If you're 5'8", you'd have been 6'1". So I was assigned female at birth and I'm 6'1". Does that mean that I should have been 6'6"? I mean, to be fair, I do have family members who are very tall, so maybe. But length to cup size, I don't think that's how it works. Girth to butt. Okay, this is so bizarre. Oh my god. Queen of the Turfs said, nobody's pissed off or trying to silence you. I simply disagreed with your publicly expressed opinion, which is one I've seen repeatedly and indeed addressed just last week. You replied to me many times, so I wasn't aware you wanted anonymity over and above your name and avatar. From now on, I'll happily hide your name. Doesn't she post people's names like relatively frequently, including like smaller people? I don't know if it's something she still does now. Well, clearly she did for this person, but I'm interested in whether you see any irony in telling me I'm not trans, so not qualified to speak, when you have literally no idea what it is to grow up female, yet feel entitled to redefine woman to include yourself. Now, this isn't bad trans anatomy, because I mean, anything J.K. Rowling says is bad trans anatomy and is just bad in terms of trans people, and wrong. I think the amount that she speaks about trans people and the amount of incorrect information and like just false stuff that she's spreads about the trans community. She is not qualified to speak. She has proven herself not qualified to speak on trans issues because she does not know enough. She does not know the truth, she does not know the facts, and she does not seem to listen to the actual trans community who've been telling her for years that she is wrong, and the trans allies as well that have been telling her for years that she is wrong and that it is causing harm what she's saying. So yeah, she is not, absolutely not qualified to speak on trans issues. Not at all. So she's told somebody, you have literally no idea what it is to grow up female, yet feel entitled to redefine woman to include yourself. I assume she was trying to say this to a trans woman, or she assumed she was saying this to a trans woman. Woman, the umbrella, does include trans women. Being trans is just a way of being human. Being a trans woman is a way of being a woman. Being a trans man is a way of being a man. Yes, there are differences in the experiences, but there are differences in the experiences within the umbrella away from trans and cis. Have other prefixes, other adjectives in there, and the experience is different. You don't go around saying to cis women who fall into different categories compared to other cis women that they are not able to call themselves women because of their different experience. But the person that she was saying this to replied, I'm a trans man. I grew up female and I didn't transition until I was 40. I know what being a woman means. Imagine like with your whole chest being like, don't tell me what it's like to live in this world as a woman, thinking you're talking to a trans woman, you're just being like grossly transphobic. But you're talking to a trans man who does have that historical experience. So trans women do experience the world as women and oftentimes face a lot of discrimination before they even come out because of their expression. Not all the time, but typically, yes. And then face discrimination in the world and prejudice and negative behavior and a lack of privilege in society after they come out as both women and trans women. So don't go telling trans men or trans women that they don't know what it's like to live in the world as a woman. But particularly here to be like, you literally have no idea what it is to grow up female, and you're saying that to a trans man who would have been socialized and raised as a girl and up until they were 40 years old lived as a woman. I just don't understand the obsession. I don't understand the obvious desperate need to not stay in one's lane. Like, being trans is a very real thing in this world. Trans people face discrimination. Trans women are women, trans men are men. The scientific community, the medical community, and the existence of trans people all supports that, evidences that, proves that. It just sounds so ludicrous to still hop on and be like, trans women aren't women. Like, it just sounds so stupid because it's so not true. Lesbian dating apps, trans women. Isn't it that only like 3% of lesbians have transphobic views? Also, I feel like most of the transphobes who have these kind of discussions, make these memes, actually turn out to be cis men. And it's like, that's a bit bizarre. Wasn't there a transphobe who's a cis man who actually went onto a lesbian dating app pretending to be a trans woman? That's not what trans women are doing. Trans women are women who are entitled to be in this woman-only space. You are a man pretending to be a woman. Very different things. A cis man, you are literally doing the exact thing that trans women don't do, and people who are not obsessed with being transphobic don't do, but you're doing the thing that you claim that other people do, but you're the only one doing it. There's literal research that shows that cis men do not pretend to be trans women to gain access to women's spaces. That doesn't happen. And there's evidence that trans women are no threat to cis women. I feel like this is just a transphobic cis straight guy making this, but even if it's not, transphobes are a minority anyway, but transphobic lesbians are a tiny minority. What trans people think they look like, what they actually look like. Yeah, sure, every single trans person, if you're forgetting the existence of trans men and you're just forgetting the fact that people vary, there's individual differences, and they're completely ignoring the fact that trans woman or cis woman, there is every possibility that a trans woman will look more like the left image and so will a cis woman, but then that either trans or cis women could look like the right image. It looks like a fork, but it lacks the essential function of a fork, so it's not really a fork. And then a character who I presume is supposed to be a trans woman crying. I assume here what they're talking about is like trans women lack the reproductive ability of what would typically be expected in a cis woman. But you're saying that trans women look like women, or potentially talking about lower surgery results with trans women. So like the genitals looks like what you would expect. But that would therefore have to mean that a cis woman who did not have reproductive organs or was missing some of them, or just anything to do with reproductive organs and genitals that were not the 100% norm for a cis woman, according to this transphobe, they are not a woman. This excludes so many cis women as well. That's what's so bizarre. Transphobes are transphobing so hard, and a lot of the time it's in the name of like protecting women's rights, whilst excluding so many women who are not just trans women but also cis women. It just doesn't make sense. Transphobia doesn't make sense. And that was the last one. I feel like I constantly try and make sense of it, and oftentimes with these things it is just a case of being like, there is no logic here, or the logic they've tried to use is deeply flawed. There is no backing for this from trans people who are the people living the experience. And you know, if you want to know about being trans and the trans community and you want to understand it, don't go to people like J.K. Rowling. Don't go on X and just scroll like the hashtags and look at what all the phobes are saying. Listen to the trans people. Like, we're the people living that life, we're the people living that experience. And I don't know why transphobes who have proven time and time again they actually just don't even know the basics about what it means to be trans, and they don't have a basic level of understanding of the research in the field, of the personal experience of trans people, of what the medical boards say, why they are the ones that are taken as the authority on the subject. It really baffles me, and this is why I say it's a house of cards on a matchstick, because they are relying on smoke and mirrors. They are relying on feeding people a conspiracy theory. They are relying on lies, and they are relying on building up air of fear around the trans community. And as soon as that starts to get poked, it's all going to come tumbling down, because it's relying on nothing of substance. There's no structure to it. There's no foundation for transphobia. There's no excuse for transphobia. There's no reason. I just think we have to be patient until that happens, because obviously homophobia still exists and is still a problem. I'm not saying that. But if we take the UK as an example of the proposed banning of discussions around being trans in schools, that was something that did happen in the 80s and through the 90s for gay people. You could have swapped out gender identity for homosexuality 20, 30 years ago, and people would have accepted it. Obviously, there were outcries, as there are outcries right now about this new proposed idea, but there was enough of a level of acceptance within like politics and the education system and society that it went through and it happened. It got repealed in 2003, and now just over 20 years later, we're seeing a similar thing happening to the trans community. You go forward 20, 30 years, people will view this proposition around teaching about trans people in schools the way they now view Section 28 from the 80s and 90s. And it is not positively. Section 28 is on the wrong side of history. In all of these discussions, it's because like, whilst homophobia still exists, there's not this like rampant obsession from enough big powerful people to give it the steam and the kind of acceptability within society that we're currently seeing with transphobia. But I do think we will move beyond this. And just like Anita Bryant was shown to be on the wrong side of history because she was so homophobic, we will see the same thing happen to people like J.K. Rowling. We just need to be patient, and honestly, like, the potential wonderful legacy that she created, destroyed, because all she's going to be remembered for is, oh, that transphobe from the 2020s. Yeah. Ooh. But yeah, go leave your comments down below of what you thought of the video. Think about giving a thumbs up and subscribing if you want to, but no pressure. And yeah, as always, thank you so much for listening and watching and just being here. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Much love. Bye.